Welcome back, my friends. Today, we are going to listen to the fascinating story of how ancient Egypt became one of the greatest civilizations in history. This is not only the story of pyramids, pharaohs, mummies, and golden treasures. It is the story of a people who learned how to survive in a difficult land, build along a powerful river, create one of the longest-lasting civilizations the world has ever known, and leave behind mysteries that still capture our imagination today. When we think of ancient Egypt, we often imagine giant pyramids rising from the desert, temples covered with strange symbols, statues of kings, and tombs hidden under sand and stone. But before all of that, there was one thing that made Egypt possible: the Nile River. Without the Nile, ancient Egypt could not have become what it became. The land around Egypt was surrounded by desert. The sun was hot. The air could be dry. Sand stretched across wide spaces. In many places, life would have been extremely hard, but through this dry land, the Nile flowed like a long green ribbon. It brought water, food, movement, and hope. Every year, the Nile flooded. To modern people, flooding can sound dangerous, and sometimes it was. But for the ancient Egyptians, the flood was also a gift. When the water rose and then went back down, it left behind rich, dark soil. This soil was perfect for farming. People could grow wheat, barley, vegetables, and other crops. They could feed families, support village, and store extra food for the future. In a world where survival often depended on the land, this was powerful. The Nile gave Egypt something very important: stability. Imagine standing near the river thousands of years ago. You hear water moving slowly. You see birds flying over the reeds. Farmers work in the fields. Boats move across the river with goods, people, and animals. Children run near mud brick houses. In the distance, the desert glows under the sun. The contrast is strong. On one side, life is green and active. On the other side, the desert is silent and harsh. This contrast shaped the Egyptian mind. The river meant life. The desert meant danger, mystery, and protection. The Nile did more than help people farm. It also helped them connect. Egypt was a long land, stretched along the river. Boats could move north and south, carrying grain, stone, wood, tools, and messages. This made it easier for communities to trade and communicate. In many ancient lands, mountains, forests, and rough roads made travel difficult. In Egypt, the river became a natural road. It helped turn small farming communities into a connected civilization. Over time, villages grew larger. Leaders became more powerful. People learned how to organize farming, store food, build irrigation systems, and manage labor. These skills were very important. A civilization does not grow only because people have water. It grows because people learn how to organize life around that water. The Egyptians had to understand the seasons. They had to measure land after the flood. They had to plan planting and harvesting. They had to work together, little by little. Order became part of Egyptian life. This order helped create government. In the early period, Egypt was divided into smaller regions. Over time, these regions became more united. Ancient tradition says that Upper Egypt and Lower Egypt were brought together under one ruler. This unification was one of the most important steps in Egyptian history. Once Egypt became more united, its leaders could organize larger projects, collect taxes, control resources, and build a stronger state. This was the beginning of Egypt's long connection between power, religion, and kingship. The ruler of Egypt would later be known as the Pharaoh. The Pharaoh was not seen as an ordinary king. In Egyptian belief, the Pharaoh had a sacred role. He was connected to the gods and responsible for keeping balance in the land. This idea of balance was very important in ancient Egypt. The Egyptians believed the world needed order against chaos. The Nile's regular flood, the rising sun, the movement of the seasons, and the stability of the kingdom all seemed connected. If the Pharaoh ruled well, Egypt could remain in harmony. If order broke down, chaos could return. This belief gave the Egyptian state great power. Religion was not separate from daily life. It shaped farming, death, kingship, art, writing, temples, and festivals. People believed the gods controlled nature, protection, fertility, death, and the afterlife. To understand ancient Egypt, we must understand that the Egyptians did not see their world as ordinary. They saw meaning everywhere: in the river, in the sun, in animals, in stars, in dreams, and in the journey after death. Writing also helped Egypt become great. The Egyptians developed a writing system known as hieroglyphs. These symbols were beautiful, complex, and powerful. They appeared on temple walls, tombs, monuments, and important objects. Writing allowed people to record events, religious texts, royal names, taxes, laws, and stories. A civilization becomes stronger when it can remember. Writing gave Egypt memory. It allowed messages to travel across time, even today. When we look at ancient Egyptian writing, we are looking at voices from thousands of years ago. The birth of ancient Egypt was not one sudden miracle. It was a slow process, built from water, soil, farming, belief, organization, and human imagination. The Nile gave life, but the Egyptian people turned that life into civilization. They built villages, created systems, followed seasons, honored gods, and developed a powerful idea of kingship. From this foundation, Egypt would rise into a civilization of temples, pyramids, art, science, and mystery. This is the first lesson from ancient Egypt. Great civilizations often begin with a simple relationship between people and nature. The Egyptians did not control the desert. They did not remove the heat. They did not change the world completely. Instead, they learned how to live with the river. They watched it, respected it, used it, and built their future beside it. From that relationship, one of history's greatest civilizations was born. As ancient Egypt grew stronger, one idea became central to everything the world needed: order. The Egyptians believed that life was not random. The sun rose each morning, the Nile flooded in its season, crops grew from the dark soil, stars moved across the night sky. Life, death, kingship, farming, and the heavens all seemed connected by a deep balance. This balance was called Ma'at. Ma'at meant truth, order, justice, harmony, and the proper way things should be for the Egyptians. Keeping Ma'at was not only a religious idea, it was the foundation of society. At the center of this world stood the Pharaoh. The Pharaoh was more than a political ruler. He was not seen as a normal king who simply gave orders and collected taxes. He was believed to have a sacred connection to the gods. His duty was to protect Egypt, honor the gods, maintain order, and keep chaos away. This gave the pharaoh enormous power. When people looked at the pharaoh, they did not only see a man wearing a crown, they saw a symbol of the whole kingdom. If the pharaoh was strong, Egypt could feel safe. If the pharaoh failed, people feared that disorder might spread. This connection between kingship and religion made ancient Egypt different from many modern societies. Today, many people separate government from religion, but in ancient Egypt, the two were joined together. Temples, ceremonies, taxes, farming, building projects, and royal authority were all connected. The pharaoh made offerings to the gods, priests performed rituals, scribes recorded important information, farmers produced food that supported temples and government, soldiers defended the land. Everyone had a place inside a system that was believed to reflect cosmic order. The gods of Egypt were many and powerful. Ra was connected with the sun. Osiris was connected with death, resurrection, and the afterlife. Isis was a protective mother goddess, associated with magic and devotion. Horus was linked to kingship and often shown as a falcon. Anubis was connected with mummification and the dead. Thoth was linked to writing and wisdom. These gods were not distant ideas. They were part of how Egyptians explained the world. The sun crossing the sky, the river flooding, the body dying, the soul traveling after death, the king ruling the land. All of these things had religious meaning. Imagine walking into an Egyptian temple thousands of years ago. The air is warm and still. Stone columns rise above you. The walls are covered with carved symbols, gods, kings, offerings, and sacred stories. Priests move quietly through hidden spaces. Incense burns. Light enters through narrow openings. The temple does not feel like an ordinary building. It feels like a bridge between the human world and the divine world. For Egyptians, temples were not only places for prayer, they were homes for the gods on earth. The pharaoh's power could be seen in monuments. A ruler who wanted to show strength did not only speak about it, he ordered temples, statues, tombs, walls, obelisks, and inscriptions. These structures were messages made of stone. They told the people, the king is strong, the gods are honored, Egypt is protected, and order continues. This is why Egyptian art often looks formal and symbolic. It was not only made to look beautiful, it was made to preserve power, memory, and sacred meaning. Writing helped support this system. Scribes were extremely important in ancient Egypt. They recorded taxes, grain, laws, royal commands, religious texts, and building plans. Most people could not read or write, so scribes held special status. Their work helped the government function. A kingdom as large and organized as Egypt needed records. It needed to know how much grain was stored, who worked on projects, which lands were taxed, and what offerings were given to temples. Without writing and administration, Egypt could not have stayed powerful for so long. Religion also shaped the Egyptian view of death. To the Egyptians, death was not simply the end. It was a journey. They believed that a person could continue into the afterlife if the body and soul were properly prepared. This belief led to mummification, tomb building, funerary texts, and offerings for the dead. The body was preserved because it mattered for the next life. Tombs were filled with objects, food, image, and writings to help the person after death. For kings and nobles, these preparations could become extremely elaborate. This belief in the afterlife gave Egyptian civilization a unique emotional power. It made death less like disappearance and more like transformation. The desert, with its dry air and hidden tombs, became a place of memory. The West, where the sun set, became linked with the land of the dead. Every evening, when the sun disappeared, it seemed to travel into another world. Every morning, when it returned, it showed that renewal was possible. In this way, nature and religion spoke the same language, but belief also supported control. If the pharaoh was sacred, then challenging him was not only political, it could be seen as a threat to order itself. This made the Egyptian state strong, but also deeply hierarchical. Power flowed from the top. The pharaoh, noble, priests, scribes, soldiers, craftsmen, farmers, and laborers all had different roles. Some lived with wealth and honor. Others worked hard, their whole lives with little freedom. Like all great civilizations, Egypt had beauty and inequality at the same time. This is the second lesson from ancient Egypt. A civilization is not built only with stone, water, and labor. It is also built with belief. The Egyptians believed that their world had meaning. They believed the Nile, the sun, the gods, the pharaoh, and the afterlife were connected. These beliefs gave them unity, confidence, and purpose. They helped Egypt organize millions of people across thousands of years. And from this powerful system of belief, Egypt would create some of the most famous monuments in human history. The pyramids. The pyramids are the most famous symbols of ancient Egypt. Even today, when people see a picture of the Great Pyramid of Giza, they feel a sense of mystery. How did people build something so huge thousands of years ago? Why did they build it? What did it mean to them? The pyramids were not only impressive buildings, they were messages of power, belief, organization, and the Egyptian dream of eternity. To understand the pyramids, we must understand how Egyptians thought about death. For them, death was not simply the end of life. It was a journey into another world. A person's body, name, soul, and memory all mattered. If the body was preserved, if the proper rituals were performed, and if the person was remembered, life could continue in the afterlife. This belief was especially important for pharaohs. A pharaoh was not seen as an ordinary human being. He was connected to the gods. So when a pharaoh died, his tomb had to reflect his sacred role. The earliest royal tombs were not giant pyramids. They were simpler structures. But over time, Egyptian builders became more ambitious. One of the most important steps was the Step Pyramid of Djoser. It was built at Saqqara and designed by Imhotep, one of the most famous figures in early Egyptian history. The Step Pyramid looked like a series of platforms rising toward the sky. It was a major achievement because it showed that Egyptians could organize large stone construction on a scale never seen before. It was not only a tomb, it was a statement. Egypt could build for eternity. Later, pyramid building reached its most famous form at Giza, the Great Pyramid, built for Pharaoh Khufu, became one of the most extraordinary structures in human history. Imagine the scene during construction. Workers move heavy stones under the hot sun. Sledges scrape across the ground. Ropes tighten. Supervisors call instructions. Dust rises into the air. Boats bring materials along the Nile. Food, tools, water, and labor must all be organized carefully. This was not a random project. It required planning, mathematics, engineering, administration, and thousands of people working together for a long time. Some people imagined the pyramids were built only by slaves. Modern understanding is more complex. Many workers were likely organized laborers, farmers, craftsmen, and specialists who worked as part of state projects. Especially during seasons when farming was limited by the Nile's cycle, these workers needed food, housing, tools, medical care, and management. The pyramids show not only the power of the pharaoh, but also the strength of Egyptian organization. A society that could build pyramids could control resources, comment labor, and plan for the long term. The pyramid shape itself carried meaning. Rising from the earth toward the sky, it may have symbolized the connection between the pharaoh and the heavens. The sun was central to Egyptian religion, and the pyramid's form could suggest rays of sunlight or a sacred path upward. Around the pyramid were temples, causeways, smaller tombs, and ritual spaces. The whole complex was designed for memory, worship, and the continued life of the king after death. But pyramids were not only about one ruler, they were also about the power of the state. When people saw a pyramid, they saw proof that Egypt was strong. They saw proof that the pharaoh could command labor, stone, food, priests, builders, and artists. They saw proof that the kingdom had order. In this way, the pyramid was both religious and political. It said, "The king is eternal. The gods are honored, and Egypt is stable." Tombs also became places of art and storytelling. Inside many Egyptian tombs, walls were painted or carved with scenes of daily life: farming, fishing, hunting, food, servant, family, gods, and rituals. These images were not only decoration, they were meant to help the dead continue life in the next world. If food was painted on the wall, it could symbolically provide food. If servants were shown, they could serve in the afterlife. If prayers and sacred texts were written, they could guide the soul. The tomb was a carefully prepared world for eternity. Mummification was another important part of this dream. The Egyptians believed the body needed to be preserved. The process was detailed and sacred. Organs were removed and protected. The body was dried, wrapped, and prepared with care. Priests performed rituals. Amulets were placed with the body. The goal was not horror or decoration. The goal was protection, transformation, and survival beyond death. To the Egyptians, preserving the dead was an act of faith. This deep focus on death might sound strange to modern listeners, but it also shows something very human. People everywhere fear being forgotten. People want their lives to matter. They want memory to continue. The Egyptians expressed this feeling through stone, writing, ritual, and art. Their tombs were attempts to defeat time. Their pyramids were attempts to make memory visible. Over the centuries, pyramid building changed. Later, pharaohs did not always build giant pyramids like those at Giza. Some chose hidden tombs, especially in places like the Valley of the Kings. These tombs were often cut into rock and filled with beautiful paintings and treasures. The goal remained similar: protect the body, honor the ruler, and prepare for the afterlife. But tomb robbers, political change, and practical challenges made hidden burial places more attractive. One of the most famous discoveries in modern history was the tomb of Tutankhamun. His tomb was not the largest or most powerful in ancient times, but it became famous because it was found with many treasures still inside: golden objects, furniture, chariots, jewelry, and the famous burial mask showed the world the richness of Egyptian royal burial culture. The discovery reminded people that Egypt's ancient dream of eternity still had the power to amaze the modern world. This is the third lesson from ancient Egypt. A civilization becomes unforgettable when it turns belief into something people can still see thousands of years later. The pyramids, tombs, and mummies were not created only for beauty. They were created because Egyptians believed life, death, kingship, and eternity were connected. Their buildings were made of stone, but their deepest material was hope, the hope that memory could survive time. Ancient Egypt is often remembered through pyramids, tombs, pharaohs, and golden treasures. But behind the great monuments was the daily life of millions of ordinary people. A civilization does not last for thousands of years only because kings build temples. It lasts because farmers grow food, workers build homes, scribes keep records, priests perform rituals, craftsmen shape objects, traders move goods, and families pass traditions from one generation to the next. To understand why ancient Egypt became one of the greatest civilizations in history, we must look not only at its rulers, but also at the people who lived along the Nile every day. For most Egyptians, life was connected to the river and the fields. The Nile shaped the calendar. There was a season when the river flooded, a season for planting, and a season for harvesting. Farmers watched the land carefully. They understood that timing mattered. When the floodwaters left rich soil behind, they planted crops such as wheat and barley. They used simple tools, worked with animals, repaired canals, and carried water where it was needed. The work was hard, but the Nile made it possible. The smell of wet earth, the sound of birds near the reeds, the heat of the sun on the fields, and the movement of workers along the river were all part of Egyptian life. Families usually lived in houses made from mud brick. These homes were practical for the climate. Inside, life was simple compared with royal palaces, but it had rhythm and meaning. People cooked bread and beer, which were central parts of the Egyptian diet. They ate vegetables, fish, onions, dates, and sometimes meat. Children played games. Parents taught skills. Women managed homes, raised children, prepared food, made clothing, and in some cases worked in trade. Temples or estates, men farmed, built, served as soldiers, or worked as craftsmen. Daily life was not always easy, but it was organized around family, work, religion, and the seasons. Craftsmen were essential to Egyptian civilization. Stonecutters, carpenters, metalworkers, potters, painters, jewelers, and weavers helped create the objects we now connect with ancient Egypt. They made tools, furniture, statues, jewelry, boats, coffins, and temple decorations. Their hands turned raw material into beauty and function. Imagine a workshop filled with the sound of chisels striking stone, wood being shaped, pottery turning, and artists mixing colors. Much of what we admire today was not made by pharaohs themselves, but by skilled workers whose names were often forgotten. Scribes held a special position because they could read and write. In a society where most people could not write, scribes were extremely valuable. They recorded taxes, grain supplies, legal agreements, royal commands, religious texts, and building plans. A scribe could sit with a writing board, ink, and papyrus, carefully recording information that helped the kingdom function. Writing gave Egypt memory, but scribes gave that memory daily life. Without them, the state could not collect taxes, organize workers, or manage large projects. Egypt's golden age is often connected with times when the kingdom was stable, wealthy, and powerful. During the New Kingdom, Egypt became especially strong. Its armies expanded influence beyond the Nile Valley. Its rulers built huge temples. Its wealth increased. Its art, religion, and architecture reached impressive levels. Pharaohs were not only local rulers, they became international powers, dealing with neighboring kingdoms through war, diplomacy, marriage, trade, and gifts. Egypt was no longer only protected by the desert and the Nile. It was now a major force in the ancient world. Some pharaohs became especially famous. Hatshepsut was one of Egypt's most remarkable rulers. She ruled as a female pharaoh in a world where kingship was usually male. Instead of focusing only on war, she supported trade, building projects, and stability. Her temple at Deir el-Bahri remains one of the most beautiful monuments of ancient Egypt. Her story is powerful because it shows that Egyptian history was not only shaped by warriors and male kings, it was also shaped by intelligence, political skill, and the ability to present power in a way people could accept. Another famous ruler was Akhenaten, who tried to change Egyptian religion by focusing worship on the Aten, the sun disk. This was a dramatic change, because Egyptian religion had long included many gods. Akhenaten's religious revolution disturbed old traditions and challenged the power of established priests. His new capital city, new art style, and new religious focus made his reign unusual. But after his death, many of his changes were rejected. Egypt returned to older religious patterns. His story shows how difficult it can be to change a deeply rooted civilization too quickly. Tutankhamun, often called King Tut, became famous not because he was the most powerful pharaoh, but because his tomb was discovered with extraordinary treasures. He was young when he ruled, and his reign was not one of Egypt's greatest politically, but his tomb gave the modern world a rare view of royal burial wealth. Golden objects, decorated furniture, chariots, and the famous burial mask helped make ancient Egypt feel close again. Through Tutankhamun, people saw the beauty, belief, and mystery of Egyptian royal culture. Ramses II was one of Egypt's most powerful and long-reigning pharaohs. He built monuments, led military campaigns, and presented himself as a great warrior king. His temples and statues were designed to show strength and permanence. Whether every royal claim was fully accurate or not, the message was clear. The pharaoh wanted to be remembered as mighty, chosen by the gods, and central to Egypt's greatness. Ramses understood the power of image. Like many rulers in history, he used monuments to shape memory. This is the fourth lesson from ancient Egypt. A great civilization is built from both ordinary life and extraordinary power. The farmer in the field, the scribe with ink, the craftsman in the workshop, the priest in the temple, and the pharaoh on the throne were all part of the same system. Egypt became great because it combined the daily rhythm of the Nile with strong government, deep belief, skilled labor, and rulers who knew how to turn power into lasting symbols. But even a civilization as strong as Egypt could not remain at its height forever. Over time, New enemies, internal weakness, foreign rule, and changing trade routes would challenge the land of the Pharaohs. Ancient Egypt had built for eternity, but history would prove that even the greatest civilizations must face decline. Like many great civilizations, ancient Egypt did not fall in one sudden moment. It declined slowly, through many centuries of pressure, change, weakness, and foreign influence. The pyramids still stood, the Nile still flowed, temples still rose above the land, priests still performed rituals, farmers still planted crops in the dark soil beside the river. But the political power of Egypt was no longer as strong as it had once been. The civilization that had seemed almost eternal began to lose control over its own future. One major problem was the difficulty of holding power across such a long period of time. Ancient Egypt lasted for thousands of years. But not every period was strong. There were times of unity, wealth, and powerful kings. There were also times of division, weak rulers, economic trouble, and competition between local leaders. When the central government was strong, Egypt could organize labor, collect taxes, build monuments, defend borders, and manage the Nile Valley. But when central power weakened, the country could split into rival regions. Local officials could become more independent. Priests and nobles could gain more influence. The pharaoh's authority could become less powerful than before. Another challenge came from outside. Egypt was protected by geography in many ways. Deserts made invasion difficult. The Nile gave life and movement. The Mediterranean and Red Sea connected Egypt to trade. But geography could not protect Egypt forever. Over time, powerful neighbors and foreign empires became stronger. Egypt faced pressure from Libyans, Nubians, Assyrians, Persians, Greeks, and later Romans. Some foreign rulers conquered Egypt and ruled it as part of larger empires. Each conquest changed the balance of power. Egypt still had culture, temples, language, and memory, but political independence became harder to maintain. The rise of new military powers also made Egypt more vulnerable. In earlier centuries, Egypt had been one of the strongest states in the region. Its armies could expand influence and protect borders, but military technology and political power changed over time. Other empires learned new methods of warfare. They built larger armies, stronger weapons, and better systems of control. If Egypt could not adapt quickly enough, it could lose ground. A civilization can be old and respected, but history does not protect a nation only because it has a glorious past. Economic pressure also mattered. Temples, monuments, armies, officials, and royal projects required resources. Egypt's wealth depended heavily on agriculture, taxation, trade, and control of land. If harvests were poor, if trade weakened, if political disorder grew, or if too much wealth was controlled by powerful institutions, the state could become weaker. The Nile was generous, but it was not perfectly predictable. Low floods or poor harvests could create hardship. When ordinary people suffered, the whole system became less stable. Religion remained powerful, but religious institutions could also become politically strong. Temples owned land, collected offerings, employed workers, and influenced society. Priests played important roles in maintaining rituals and honoring the gods. But as temple wealth and priestly power grew, the pharaoh's direct control could become more complicated. Egypt's belief system had helped create unity, But the same system also created powerful groups within society. A civilization is often strongest when its institutions work together. It becomes weaker when those institutions compete for influence. Then came one of the most famous later chapters of Egyptian history, the age of Greek influence, after Alexander the Great. Alexander conquered Egypt in the 4th century BC. After his death, one of his generals, Ptolemy, took control and began the Ptolemaic dynasty. These rulers were Greek in origin, but they ruled Egypt and adopted many Egyptian traditions. They built temples, honored Egyptian gods, and presented themselves as pharaohs. The city of Alexandria became a great center of learning, trade, and culture. It had a famous library, scholars, sailors, merchants, and people from many parts of the Mediterranean world. The most famous ruler from this later period was Cleopatra VII. She was intelligent, politically skilled, and connected to the wider struggles of the Roman world. Her story is often told as a story of beauty and romance, but it was also a story of survival and power. Cleopatra tried to protect Egypt's independence, while Rome was becoming stronger. But Rome's power was too great. After her defeat and death, Egypt became a province of the Roman Empire in 30 BC. This marked the end of Egypt as an independent ancient kingdom. But the end of political independence did not mean the end of Egypt's influence. This is one of the most important parts of the story. Ancient Egypt continued to live through its monuments, writing, art, religion, architecture, and memory. Its temples remained. Its statues stood. Its tombs waited in the desert. Its symbols traveled into later cultures. The image of the pyramid, the Sphinx, the Pharaoh, and the mummy became part of the world's imagination. Modern people still study ancient Egypt because it asks deep questions. How did people build such enormous monuments? How did they organize society for so long? Why did they care so deeply about the afterlife? What can their art and writing teach us about power, belief, and memory? Each discovery, each tomb, each inscription, and each statue gives us another small piece of a civilization that refused to be forgotten. Ancient Egypt became one of the greatest civilizations in history because it combined nature, belief, organization, and imagination. The Nile gave life. The Pharaoh gave political and religious unity. The scribes gave memory. The farmers gave food. The craftsmen gave beauty. The priests gave sacred meaning. The builders gave stone form to dreams of eternity. Together, they created a civilization that lasted longer than almost any other in human history. This is the final lesson from ancient Egypt. Great civilizations do not survive only through power. They survive through the stories they leave behind. Egypt lost its independence. Its ancient language changed. Its old religion faded. Its kings disappeared. But its memory remained strong. Thousands of years later, people still look at the pyramids and feel wonder. They still study the Nile, the pharaohs, the tombs, and the golden treasures. They still ask why this ancient civilization feels so mysterious and so alive. Thank you for listening to this story. Now, write one simple sentence in the comments. You can write, I learned that ancient Egypt became great because of the Nile, belief, order, and imagination. Keep listening, keep learning, and I will see you in the next story.